This is the final sound check before we get started. So today we're going to be talking about sustainable lawn care. And I need to add a little kind of primer here for everybody. When I'm talking about sustainable, there are sometimes two ways of thinking about this. A lot of times folks will think, oh, you're going to tell us how we can make it so we have to do no maintenance to our lawns. They'll just take care of themselves. Or there's the other side of thought, where we're going to make them more environmentally friendly. We're going to be talking more about the latter. Whenever you have a plant, a living thing, there is really no such thing as a no maintenance yard, landscape, lawn, garden, any of that. And I would even say a lot of the artificial landscapes like AstroTurf and even some of those fake flower arrangements you see outside, they need maintenance every once in a while. You got to vacuum off that AstroTurf and you got to dust off your fake flowers and hopefully change them out for the seasons at least. So today we're going to talk about how we can be a bit more environmentally friendly with our lawns. And, it really starts with good lawn culture. And these are just the basics of taking care of a lawn. And these are parts where a lot of homeowners, whether you've just purchased a home or you've been a homeowner for a long time, these are things that we often either neglect, overlook, or we just don't know about them. And so let's talk about how we should be taking care of our turf grass so that we can lead to a more sustainable, and when I say sustainable, I really like referring more to like a more resilient type of a lawn, which can tolerate things like drought or flooding, or someone like me, the absent-minded lawn care person. So let's talk about how we can take care of turf grass. And the first thing we need to talk about is the types of lawns that we grow. Now, where I'm located here in central Illinois, we grow primarily cool season grasses. So this means in our neck of the woods, the grasses, they are green and actively growing in the spring up until kind of early summer. And then this time of year, they do start to brown out and go dormant. And then as we cool off later on in the summer, they green back up and they start actively growing again. So cool season grasses for our neck of the woods and for the majority parts of Illinois is what will be growing. But as we get farther into southern Illinois, we do work more with warm season grasses because these guys are going to be actively growing during the hottest times of year. And the farther south you go in the state and in the country, you're just going to get a longer green period for that period. But for that, this talk today, we're going to concentrate mostly on cool season grasses and their culture. And so to keep that in mind, and what type of cool season grasses do we grow? Well, the predominant ones are Kentucky bluegrass and tall fescue. If you have a cool season lawn, this is more than likely what you have growing out in your yard. Now, there are other ones like fine fescues, but we tend not to see those as commonly unless you're growing in like the shade or maybe kind of a utility type area. But we're going to talk about a couple different species out there that we can be using. So when it comes to taking care of your lawn, the first thing, the thing that we all have to do if we have a lawn, and I think a lot of us do have lawns, especially, again, where I'm at here in central Illinois, we do have a lot of single-family housing in our cities and towns and in our rural areas, and everybody, whether they own it or they rent it, they're mowing. And so mowing is a really critical component of taking care of your lawn. I say it's the most basic and time consuming, and that is certainly true of all of your maintenance activities. You got to do it pretty much most of the year, except for the hottest time of the summer and the coldest times of the winter. But proper mowing is also fundamental for keeping a good, healthy lawn. And for if you have a good, healthy lawn, if you have good mowing practices, then that means you're spending less money on inputs and things like fertilizers and fungicides, insecticides, because maybe your lawn isn't kept up as well as it should be. So mowing is critical. The first aspect of mowing is your mowing height. Something to keep in mind is I have used a lot of different mowers since I was a young lad, and they all seem to have these dials or these things where you can adjust the mowing height. And I've found very rarely does that ever actually correspond to the actual height. So in my current, I have a Toro push mower right now. I adjust each one of the wheels to be a certain height, and the wheels, it's marked a 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch. When I go out and I put that mower on like a driveway or sidewalk and I measure it, what that actual mowing height is, I set mine at 3 inches. It's probably about 2 inches, maybe a quarter inch if it's feeling generous there. So you really do have to go out there and check the mowing height. Use a ruler and make sure that you are aware of what exactly is your mowing height, because you might think you're setting it for 3 inches, but you might only be setting it for 2.5 inches. And when it comes to our cool season lawns, they like to be mown a little bit higher than a lot of people expect. Now, there are some homeowners out there, and I do get these phone calls into the office where, they're like, oh, I really want this fairway lawn in my front yard, like a golf course. And it's like, well, sure, that's doable, but do you have a budget that the golf course has and a full-time maintenance staff that come through and the equipment that they need? Well, no. Really, to maintain like a golf course fairway, putting green, cutting height, you need a lot of inputs to go in there, and that's not very sustainable. And so the idea with our cool season lawns, they really prefer to be cut at a 2 to 3 inch mowing height, especially, we talk about Kentucky bluegrass, perennial rye, tall fescue, 2 to 3 inches. Again, my mowing height, my goal for my own yard is about 3 inches. And this is adequate. This is not only is it going to be more conducive for the growth of your lawn, it will also make them more competitive to other weeds that might also frequent your lawn. And we'll talk about weeds later on in the program. The other thing about cutting height, and the one critical component, is that however high you cut your lawn, that is the type of root system that will develop to support that above ground growth. So the ratio of root growth to above ground vegetative growth directly correspond to each other. So if you cut at a 1 inch height, as we can see on the slide here, then you only have about 2 to 3 inch of root growth down below the soil line to support that. And what happens when we encounter a drought? Well, you do not have as extensive of a root system as, say, if you would cut it at a 3.5 inch height, whereas you can see at the other end of the spectrum here, we have a much deeper rooted turf grass, which can be more resilient to drought or compacted soil or other types of stresses that would befall it. So taller cutting height, better, more established root system, more resilient lawn, more sustainable practice. The other thing to keep in mind is how often should we be mowing? So the objective here, when we mow, we follow the 1/3 rule, and that is that we do not remove more than 1/3 of the grass blade at any one mowing. I know this can be tough to do, especially if you're like me, kids and dog and work and all of the other things that come with life. And essentially what I'm saying here is just stay on top of your mowing. And if it does get away from you, you set your mowing height as high as it will go, and you just you'll mow once, wait a day or two, mow again, and you adjust it back down to your desired mowing height. But the 1/3 rule, when we've all done this before, the lawn gets up to becomes a jungle, like 7, 8 inches, and then we knock it back down to 3 inches and it looks terrible. So just keep in mind the 1/3 rule is the ideal way the ideal amount of leaf blade to remove at any one mowing. And the other thing, one of the things that drives me a bit crazy when I see especially professional lawn care companies that have dull mower blades. And dull mower blades, what they do is they result in these, they don't cut, they tear, they rip, they fray, and you get this really wispy kind of brown tips to the turf grass. Makes it more difficult for the turf grass to seal up those wounds, because when we mow, we're wounding the turf grass. And it could also promote more entry for disease. So make sure you keep those blades sharp. Sharpen those blades at least once per growing season, and that's a minimum. I really do recommend at least once in the beginning of this mowing season. Probably right in the middle of the mowing season would be another good one. There are some species of turf grass also that are a little bit more tougher than others, and so you might be sharpening your mowing blades, once a month, just to keep that good, clean cut. Make sure that you're cutting your lawn, not tearing it up. And the other thing, something some people take more serious than others, as you can see this gentleman certainly does, is your mowing pattern. Which direction are you going with your mower, whether it's a push mower or a riding mower? If you keep going clockwise, that's your pattern around your entire lawn, then over time your turf grass will lean over to that side, and so you're not going to be very effective at mowing. You're going to go mow your lawn, and then you're going to put everything away. You stand back, iced tea in your hand, look around, you're like, oh, you missed several spots. Well, vary that mowing pattern up. Instead of going clockwise, go counterclockwise. And the next week, go diagonal, or back and forth, north, south, east, west. So vary it up. That way you don't get grass leaning over in one direction. More efficient cut also in your mower. Additionally, delay mowing in problem areas. Is kind of a common occurrence because we want to get out there before the rain or right after the rain, or we're busy and we have to get out there and mow. But really do delay mowing, especially if the turf grass is still wet after a rain, or if the soil is still soggy. And so we've seen this all happen before, where we get ruts in the lawn and we tear it up. So delay mowing. And just also keep in mind, this is not a race. Make sure that you're not going so fast when you're mowing. 3 miles per hour is adequate. You don't take those corners like you're at the Daytona 500. So that is essentially mowing. That is kind of the core tenet that will, doing those practices correctly is kind of at the center of the target that is lawn health. And the next thing, really the foundation of this whole thing, is building soil health. And this is where we really do bridge into something that does incorporate a lot of sustainable practices. Because conventional turf grass practices, they often don't consider soil as a component here. We often think of turf grass as this carpet we roll out, and we'll feed it with fertilizers, we'll irrigate it, we'll put on a fungicide program, but we don't often think about that maybe we could lessen some of those inputs by focusing on soil health. So let's talk about that. So according to IMU Extension, biologically balanced soil is considered one in which almost half of that biomass that you would be holding in your hand, that's bacteria. And it's a lot of organisms in there. And the other thing, and we're going to talk about fertilizers and the difference between synthetics and organics. The thing about organically derived fertilizers is they often contain carbohydrates and protein. We're going to examine that here, what that means in the next couple slides. But one thing I want to point out is when I talk about organic fertilizers, I'm not talking about certified organic. I'm talking about products that are derived from an organic source. This might be harvested from something out in nature, or it could be a byproduct of some type of processing or industrial waste. So just keep that in mind. I'm not talking about certified organic. I'm talking about products that are derived from living or once living organisms. When it comes to soil, this would not be an extension program if I didn't say do a soil test, but this is important. Soil testing for a lawn is something that I find is rarely occurs. And I've gotten a couple, I'd say a handful of calls where it seems like the homeowner, they toss lime out on their turf grass every year. Not based on a soil test, but because the neighbor does it, or because the farmer's doing it, or because Uncle Bob said you need to do that every year because that's how you keep your lawn healthy. And what winds up happening is, in a couple instances, these homeowners wind up creating an environment that is not conducive for turf grass. And we have even seen a couple cases where the shade trees start to decline and the landscape plantings start to decline because they have added so much product to the soil without actually seeing if the soil needs it first. So make sure that we conduct a soil test. If you have a brand new new construction, test the soil right away before you put any plants in the ground. If you have an established lawn, you can go on a 3-year rotation. If you have certain problem areas where you have noticed the nutrient deficiency in previous tests or a pH imbalance, then it's probably a good idea to test those almost every year. And the other thing, the key thing when it comes to new construction, and when I did landscape installation several years ago, this is the situation we would often encounter. We would roll up to a job, and we would have either seed or sod with us, and this is the soil that we would encounter. Now, a conventional development practice, what they do is they take the topsoil off of an area to be developed, whether it's residential, commercial, or whatever. They take that topsoil off, and they're supposed to set that soil aside so that after all of the earthwork and grading practices are over, they then put the topsoil back on. But we know that is often not the case. Very often what happens is that topsoil is sold, and we're left with this, a nasty, inert, this is a red clay subsoil. So it's important here that we need to reactivate the biological activity in the soil. And how are we going to do this? Well, I'm going to introduce you to, let's call this guy Steve. Steve is a microorganism. He lives in the soil. So everyone say, hello, Steve. So what happens when, say if we're in this new construction situation, we want to reactivate the biological activity in the soil, we put our turf grass down, whether it's sod or seed, and we throw synthetic fertilizers on it. Well, Steve's not so happy because the synthetic fertilizers, while they do feed the plants, they don't necessarily feed the soil biology, the bacteria and fungi that live in the soil and that we want to promote good soil health. And so if we switch that up, though, if we, instead of synthetic fertilizers, we use organic-based fertilizers or organic matter, Steve is happy because, he is able to munch on this, and once Steve and all of his friends break this organic matter down, they make nutrients plant available. And so this whole process, not only does it feed the plants, but it also feeds the soil. So organic matter is important. We're going to talk about organic matter right now. But one thing to keep in mind, as I said, the plant, the turf grass in this case, doesn't care where the nitrogen comes from. Nitrogen is the predominant nutrient that your turf will be using when it's growing. We don't grow turf for flowers or fruits. We grow it for its vegetative growth, and that's nitrogen. So the lawn doesn't care whether it comes from an organic source or a synthetic source. So those two things being somewhat equal, why not, in addition to feeding your turf, feed your soil? And there are other benefits that come from promoting soil health by using organic matter. We're going to hit on those. Lawn clippings. This is another really good way to add organic matter back into your soil. Now, there are a lot of believers out there who think you should be bagging these things up and hauling them out to the curb or tossing them in the compost pile. But one thing I will let you know, that if you let your clippings lay on the lawn, so you let them discharge out onto the lawn, you will add about 1 pound of nitrogen back into your lawn, which is equivalent to 1 fertilizer application. So just keep that in mind. Clippings, they do good. They don't contribute to thatch. Thatch is a problem that arises from certain species of turf grass, certain practices that we do that are incorrect, like over-fertilization, over-watering, and a couple things that we're going to get into in the next couple slides. So lawn clippings are good, a good way to add organic matter and nutrients back into the soil. Some more interesting research that has come out of Michigan State University shows that shredding your fall leaves can also improve lawn health by feeding the soil. What it does, you shred those leaves up into the lawn. Mulching mowers work the best. This drives more organic matter back into the soil, which the microorganisms, like Steve, decompose. They release those nutrients. That becomes plant available. It means you use less fertilizer. They're seeing better spring green-ups with these types of programs. And what they also found in their research is there was excellent weed control. So after 3 years of shredding leaves into their research plots, they found 100% control of dandelion and crabgrass. And I'm sure nobody listening right now have those weeds in your lawn, so I probably don't need to worry about that. But how that works is the shredded leaves, at the end of the season, you probably have a couple bare spots in your lawn. Now, if you think about landscape beds, we mulch them to keep the weeds down. Same thing happens when these leaves get shredded in your lawn. They sift down to the soil level if there's any little bare spots, and they keep them covered up. That way, the dandelion or crabgrass, they can't necessarily germinate as easily. as if that soil were bare, open, and exposed. And so then you just wait, either if you're growing a type of grass that will spread, like Kentucky bluegrass, or you come in and you overseed later on with something like a tall fescue, then you wind up getting excellent weed control. So it does make sense, and as a long-term approach to weed control. The other practice to get more organic matter, and also in this case oxygen and water, into your lawn, is core aeration. Core aeration also addresses issues like thatch, compaction, poor drainage. So all you need in those situations is this hollow tine aerator, as we see here in this slide here. They're the ones that physically take the plugs out of the soil and they deposit them on the ground, which opens the soil up to more air and water infiltration. And so it's good for your lawn, good for helps to relieve compaction and thatch. So a good practice. If you've never done it before, make sure that you are aerating. Do it this year. Best time to aerate a cool season lawn is when it's green and actively growing, so in spring and fall. The other thing which I found out, the first time I tried to core aerate, it was a little dry out. And when it's dried, the tines of the hollow tine aerator, they do not penetrate as easily into the soil, and so the machine was actually bouncing all over the place, and it was a really good workout for my forearms, but didn't do a very good job aerating the lawn. So it's a good idea, if you're going to aerate, wait a few days, maybe after a rain event, or you can irrigate to soften up the soil, to allow the aerator to get good purchase in the soil and really do its job. So just a quick question here in the chat box. Janet asks, just want to confirm that the shredded leaves are left in place on the in the lawn in fall. So yes, so what you would do, and I've been doing this the last couple of years, and so pretty much I don't have a mulching mower. Mulching mowers would work best. So you have the trees are dropping leaves on your lawn, and you're mowing your lawn like you normally do. And I just run over it, 2-3 times. And it shreds those leaves up, and they just sift right down into below the grass blades and right down to the soil level. And they just left on there, and they decompose throughout the winter and add nutrients and organic matter to the soil. So yes, you're going to be shredding them in the fall, and those particles will then sift down to the soil, and they will get decomposed and do their job. Another good practice for adding organic matter to the soil is top dressing. If you would core aerate, you would top dress after doing the core aeration. So what you could do, the recommendation is about 1 inch of yard waste compost or any commercially bought compost. One thing to keep in mind, you don't need this fancy contraption like what this fella here has in the picture. Typically, I either have a bag of compost or like a 5-gallon bucket of compost, dump it in a pile on the lawn, and I just rake it down. You want to make sure that you do rake it down so that you're not smothering the lawn, that you're using a hard tooth rake first, and then I use a leaf rake to then really sift it into the lawn and scratch it in, because I, again, don't want to be smothering the turf grass with it. So compost is great. When it comes to adding compost to the soil, it can reduce your fertilizer needs by up to 50%. The Sustainable Sites Initiative quotes that compost is probably one of the most sustainable practices, or composting is one of the most sustainable practices a homeowner can do for their own home. It's simply recycling nutrients or energy within your landscape so that you're not trucking it off site or burning it or whatever, so plants can reuse that. Compost also will decrease the amount of irrigation that's required. So 3%, so if your soil contains 3% of organic matter, that 3% holds about 1 gallon of water per cubic foot. And so kind of the way to illustrate that is when we encounter drought, even some of those extreme droughts, do all of our, does the corn and soybeans, do they all just start wilting and fall over? No, they don't, because that organic matter is like a water bank in our soil. And so it holds that water for when plants need it, especially in times of drought or environmental stress. And so organic matter is good. and it can help to hold water, increase our water holding capacity. There's also, again, additional microbes. We're talking about increasing soil biodiversity. So we're adding more microbes from the compost, which helps to break down things like thatch. And also it provides a wide range of nutrients, kind of a wide smorgasbord of macro and micronutrients that plants do require, which are often not found in most fertilizers. Most fertilizers often have, 3 to 6, they only have a handful of actual nutrients within them. And also it improves soil texture. We mentioned it increases water holding capacity. So if you have a sandy soil, that's good. It will increase the amount of water your soil will hold. If you have a heavy clay soil, it helps to break up that clay structure. It facilitates drainage. And so organic matter, compost, can't talk it up enough. Hopefully I have so far today, and you've seen the merits of adding organic matter to your lawns to help build up a good, healthy soil. Let's touch a little bit on organic fertilizer sources. Again, these are organic based, not certified organic. These are just derived from living or once living organisms. This is a list that I retrieved from an extension website, and it lists the various materials here on the left side of the screen, and talks about and then gives their N, P, and K, their nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It also then gets in some of the other nutrients that are important. So one of the things to keep in mind, and as you look at this, most of these are byproducts of processing or in some type of industrial process. And so things like blood meal, that's a byproduct from the meat slaughtering industry. And blood meal is something that's very high in nitrogen, and so something that I have been using more and more on my lawn. So most of these, if you think about the idea coming at it from a sustainable approach, you're taking something that has already been created as a byproduct from some processing, and you find another use for it. So that's a really good way to recycle products, to bring something that would have necessarily been a waste and having a use for it. Keep in mind though, there's one thing on this list that kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit, bat guano. You hear a lot about the good uses of bat guano and also use of kelp. Now, if you think about it though, those two things are not necessarily byproducts. Some of them might be, but not all of them would necessarily be byproducts of some type of processing action. And so keep in mind, if it were me, I would probably be targeting more something, if I was going the sustainable approach, some byproduct like milorganite, which is the human waste. So the sewage treatment plants, some of them, they can produce these products like milorganite, which are perfectly safe to use on your gardens and lawns and so on. And it's full of nutrients, and it's a byproduct, something that would have otherwise been a waste and maybe just sent to a landfill. When should you be applying fertilizers? So this is something that a lot of homeowners tend to, we don't tend to get this one right because it's our own darn fault. When we're coming out of winter, the first thing we want to do is we want to get out in the garden and the landscape and the lawn, and we want to fertilize, we want to do all this work outside. We're chomping at the bit to do it. But if you're only going to fertilize once in an entire year, that one time should actually be at the end of the growing season, in the late summer, early fall. And we are speaking again specifically on cool season grasses. So if you're just going to do it once, late summer, early fall. If you're going to fertilize twice, then yes, spring application is definitely would be great. And myself and my own home lawn, I prefer a late summer, early fall application, and then I would put on a winterizer application, and then I actually skip the spring application. And so, but if you're going to do it once, and most homeowners only do it once, one fertilizer application a year, it's at late summer, early fall for your cool season lawns. And that other thing that we tend to we want to do this in the spring because we think this is the best thing, our best time of year, or we just really want to get outside at that point in time, is when do we want to establish a new or overseed an existing lawn. Again, most of us are going out in the springtime and we're throwing down that seed, but really the ideal time is that late summer, early fall. For us here in Central Illinois, it's mid-August to mid-September. And that can be adjusted about as much as 2 weeks sooner for if you're up in northern Illinois or later down in southern Illinois. And so late summer, early fall, best time for overseeding a lawn. This is because as we're coming out of the summer, the soils are warm. We get better germination. As opposed to coming out of winter in the spring, the soils are cold. We get less efficient germination. We also have a lot of annual weeds germinating in the spring, a lot of competition. In this late summer, early fall, a lot of those annual weeds, those summer annuals, they're done. And so less competition. The other thing, and especially when we're talking these cool season lawns, is if we would seed in the spring, and this gives our turf grass less time to establish an adequate root system to then tolerate the hot, dry summer. So doing that in the fall gives it the fall, the winter, and the spring, and now we have almost an entire year has gone by, and we now are more prepared for hot summer temperatures for our cool season grasses. So late summer, early fall, that's the time to overseed. Overseeding should look something like this, or if you're seeding a new lawn, don't make it too dense, don't make it too thin. Did a little study, just a kind of demonstration project with some students at Western Illinois University, and we found that yes, if you seed too densely, what happens? More seed is not necessarily a good thing. What happens is these seeds are very dense and they actually wind up exhausting all of the nutrients and energy in that small space that they have because they don't have very many roots, or they're all in this confined volume when they're first starting out, and you wind up getting complete die-off of lawns if they're too dense, and if it's too thin, then it's not as competitive to things like weeds. All different types of ways to spread seed, from drop spreaders to broadcast spreaders to this one here on the bottom left corner, which is I like this one. This is like a slit seeder. There's these discs which cut these furrows in the lawn, and they're connected to a hopper which puts seed down into the slit that's cut, and it's metered and very precise and exact. But I don't have anything like that here. I typically just use the good old-fashioned spreading by the hand. And so there's a couple other practices when it comes to, especially for my case, filling in bare spots. I have a dog, I have kids, and it's just I have a red maple in my backyard. Those things are terrible when it comes to lawns. So bare spots are a problem, and so you just scratch those up with a rake. I mix a 50-50 mix of compost and topsoil, and then I mix that. I put about 3 scoops of that topsoil compost mix into a bucket, 1 scoop of the seed, mix that together, and put that on the bare spots. That's how I patch things in. There's actually a really good YouTube video online that walks you through that. It's from Cornell. So you would just search on YouTube Cornell patch bare spots and turf, and that will take you to the video. So they walk you right through it. It's a really good way to it works really well. Let's talk about water. When it comes to lawns in Illinois, you have two choices. You can water them or you don't have to. So if you do, in fact, water your lawn, something to keep in mind is that to maintain that green and active growth, especially during our hot dog days of summer, which we are in right now, you need at least 1 to 1.5 inch of water per week. And so this is something to keep in mind. Really, though, you need to water on an as-needed basis. We shouldn't be watering right now. Hopefully, we've been getting plenty of rain. We've been getting lots of rain these last couple days, and so the irrigation system should be off. But you know what? That doesn't always happen. Some of the things that really drive me crazy is when I remember this very specifically walking, from a place where I used to work. Have my umbrella out because it's pouring rain out, walking from the parking lot up to the office, and the sprinkler system's on. Doesn't make sense. And so that's when we're going to get into some of these guidelines here. So only water when your lawn needs it. Only water deeply and infrequently. Very often, a lot of homeowner irrigation controllers will be programmed to pop on for 5 minutes at a time, you know, in the middle of a hot, dry day. That doesn't do very much because most of that water is evaporating before it really gets in the soil to do any good. So you want to water deeply and infrequently. So water for long periods of time, but don't do it very frequently. You want to get good saturation in that soil. Roots will follow that water. Water early in the morning. Don't water in the middle of a windy, 100-degree day. Again, most of that water will evaporate before it does any good. And then the next thing here is use a smart irrigation controller. Now, these are really cool, these smart irrigation controllers. And what they do, this is something that's promoted by EPA. One of the startling statistics that I find very unfortunate is that our outdoor residential water use accounts for about 9 billion gallons of water per day. Now think about that. We're making water, taking it and making it potable so that we can drink it, and then 9 billion gallons every day we dump that out onto our lawns and landscapes. Doesn't make sense, does it? So we waste about 50% of that water is wasted every day due to overwatering, whether we have our irrigation system on when it's raining or it kicks on a couple hours after it's rained, or the lawn actually doesn't need to be watered. And so we waste a lot of water, good clean drinking water. And so one of the things, especially in the more arid and drought prone states in the US, we're seeing EPA's WaterSense logo. This is a program to help save water when it comes to lawn and landscape irrigation. And so these controllers, these WaterSense controllers, they can save an average home about 8,800 gallons of water each year. So, and what they said is every home in the US that has an automatic irrigation system replace their conventional controller with a WaterSense controller, we could save about $435 million in water costs and 120 billion gallons of water annually. That's billion with a B. So that's a significant chunk. And so what are these WaterSense controllers? All the different irrigation companies make them. They connect to your irrigation system. They automatically turn your irrigation valves on and off. And these are connected to things like rain gauges or soil moisture probes. Some of the really nice ones are connected to university or government-based websites that monitor weather and evapotranspiration rates, and they can do the calculations to say, okay, this is how much water you need now, or don't turn on the irrigation system, there's a storm front coming through, and so these irrigation systems are getting really, really smart and handy. So we shouldn't be seeing the irrigation systems on in the middle of a downpour anymore. So if you have an automatic irrigation system, consider switching to a smart irrigation controller. And then for all the rest of us, I don't have an irrigation system. I don't feel the need to water my lawn in the summer because I know I'm just going to let it go dormant. The dormancy mechanism for cool season grasses, it was what protects it during the hot dog days of summer. It allows the crown to stay alive. And so it happens, I remember as a kid running around on the turf grass barefoot, you got these dry, brittle leaves. The crowns of the turf grass are more exposed, and so you do have to be a bit more careful when it comes to, walking, excessive amounts of traffic, whether it's a dog, kid, or truck. And also, I think something to keep in mind is, a lot of folks will get concerned when their turf grass turns the straw brown color. Dormant turf can survive up to 4 weeks. So 4 weeks, hot, dry summer, no rain, it will survive. And once the rains return and the temperatures cool down, the turf will green back up once growing conditions are more conducive to it. So I say this is the approach that I would prefer. It will save water. There's no need to irrigate a cool season lawn in the summer, when we experience one of our typical summers. And so something to keep in mind, dormant turf will survive. It will green back up. Let's see. So another question here in the chat box. What type of water applicator do you favor if you don't have an irrigation system? So when it comes to lawn irrigation, and I don't have a set irrigation system, my main, so let's be clear, my main water applicator are my children. We set the sprinkler up outside and they run through it. And so that's pretty much the only time in the summer that my lawn gets watered, is when the kids are out playing in the sprinkler. Now I do have a lot of containers and vegetables and things like that in my backyard, and so when I'm emptying out the hose, things like that, I have one of those expandable hoses, and I empty it out on the lawn. It's really not enough to amount to anything. So that's one thing. But if you do have one of the things I keep in mind, if you do have an irrigation system though, there are new nozzles out there that apply water more efficiently than the old spray nozzles, which shoot out a bunch of water so fast that the soil usually can't absorb it. You get a lot of runoff. Or the rotors, which, it's like the typewriter, tick, 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 brrr. Those are the rotor nozzles. They apply water very slowly. And so the irrigation companies, they have hybridized those things so that we apply less water and slow enough so that it infiltrates better into the soil. They go by various names depending on what company you use, whether it's Rainbird or Toro or whoever. The names, it's essentially a hybrid of the words spray and rotor, spray rotors. And so those are more efficient. So if you do have an irrigation system, switch your nozzles out to something like that. You will use less water and it will be applied more efficiently to your lawn. But otherwise, it would be some type of an overhead irrigation system. All right. The next question is how I can prevent crabgrass. All right. Well, I think we're in the right section for that. We're going to talk about all types of fun pests and disease. And when it comes to pests, I'm talking about disease, weeds, and insects. So we're going to get into that crabgrass question here. And then the next question here, could you discuss caring for grass under trees? Yep, we're going to talk about that as well. So the first thing we're going to mention here under pests is disease management. First thing you can do, select varieties of turf grass that are resistant to diseases. And turf grass breeders are coming out with new varieties every single year that are resistant to to various types of diseases which certain species are more vulnerable to. The other thing you can do is promote soil health, something that we already talked about. More organic matter, good healthy soil. Not only does good healthy soil provide a buffer for things like pH that might be too low or too high or lots of salts, a good healthy biodiverse soil also provides a buffer to disease. You just have more going on. There's more of a competition occurring there. And the other thing is, when it comes to disease in your turf grass, make sure that your growing conditions aren't conducive to disease development. As this picture here illustrates, you got standing water on your turf and you're constantly battling disease. Throwing a fungicide down in this situation is not actually going to solve your problem. You have to correct what growing conditions are occurring that are conducive to disease development. So when it comes, and usually it's water. Most of the questions that come in to the office when there's a disease, it's an issue with drainage, with water. And so the idea here is, my proposal is redirect your water appropriately. And I say appropriately, don't just dump it all on top of your neighbor, because that's not nice. So don't do that. But redirect water to an area that's designated to handle higher volumes of water. Like we have this vegetated swale here on the left side of the screen. It's just a turf swale. Water comes down here. It slowly moves down to what is probably a culvert at the far end here. Or you can do something a bit more decorative and do some type of dry creek bed or a rocked swale, and you can make it more ornamental in nature. So better aesthetics here. So redirect your water more appropriately to somewhere that can handle it. And we can even talk about rain gardens, things like that. And we have a whole couple topics on our YouTube page, U of I Extension Horticulture YouTube, about rain gardens. We'll get into that if you're interested. The other thing also, improve your air circulation in your backyard. Very often we take our mechanical shears and we create these either these meatballs or these like giant pillars of dense vegetation. And while that might feel like it creates nice privacy or whatnot, and like a yard such as this pictured here, if we would do that, it would create a very stagnant backyard. You can see it's low, probably doesn't get good airflow to begin with. And so we need to prune the vegetation to it can block some of the sight lines, it can baffle some of the airflow, but we still want to make sure that we get good air and light into the backyard, because typically in a stagnant backyard where there's not good airflow or there's low light conditions, we get disease problems. And so something to keep in mind when it comes to the surrounding vegetation or even fencing in a backyard. The other thing is watch over fertilization. An excessive amount of nitrogen will promote a lush growth of grass, which is more vulnerable to diseases and other insect pests. And so and even during an abnormally wet season, say you put the fertilizer down and we had a gully washer like we did this morning in my neck of the woods, all of that fertilizer winds up in the waterways and we get a degradation of our natural water environments. So avoid over-fertilization. When it comes to putting down fertilizer, we recommend 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. No more than that. More than that would be excessive. And so 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. That is our recommendation. Also make sure you identify the disease correctly. Is this Pythium blight? Or is this just an area that, maybe the dog lifted his leg here, or this could be just a spot that has stayed waterlogged and the roots have just rotted out from underneath. So make sure that you identify them correctly, and when you have the accurate identification, you can then apply the appropriate treatment. Typically it is a fungicide that you would be applying. I will say though that if a disease in your lawn becomes so bad that it impacts the aesthetics of your lawn, you will be better off remedying, again, the growing conditions that are conducive to that disease than to actually treating it with a fungicide. Fungicides actually cannot cure a disease. Fungicides are predominantly preventative, so you got to get that fungicide down before you even start seeing these issues. So when it comes, the thing like with golf courses and things like that, they have fungicides injected into their irrigation water, so they are routinely applying those things to the turf grass. This is not something we can ordinarily do in everyday homeowner lawn. So again, remedy the conditions that are conducive to the disease, and in the case that I've seen is predominantly poor drainage. Now, if you have a question about diseases, you contact your local extension office for help in an identification of that disease. One of the things I really do recommend, though, is you send in a sample, you cut out a chunk of your lawn, send it into the University of Illinois Plant Clinic in Champaign-Urbana, where they can culture that disease out and give you a very accurate diagnosis. Weeds. Weeds can be a problem in a lawn, and I can attest to that. Now, the things that we have talked about prior, lawn culture, mowing, fertilizing at the right time, aerating your lawn, all of these cultural practices will reduce weeds in your lawn by about 80%. Now, for someone like me, that's good enough. I'm not going to sweat the extra 20%. And usually I would say I follow those practices. The weeds in my turf would it's probably maybe 5% off the top of my head. So when it comes to weed management, mowing your lawn higher, fertilizing at the appropriate times, core aerating, and all those good mowing practices that we talked about, that will make your lawn more competitive over the weeds. So this is a long-term game here. This is not like a short-term, spray and be done. Another product out there, which maybe you have or haven't heard of, is corn gluten meal. Corn gluten meal is another byproduct of the milling industry, and so a good product in terms of it's a byproduct. We're finding another use for it, and research out of Iowa State University has found that there is some pre-emergence control. So It prevents weed seeds from germinating, and weed seeds, well, any seeds from germinating. So, a practice has been marketed by companies that you spread corn gluten meal. It will prevent the germination of weed seeds in your lawn. There's also nitrogen attached to corn gluten meal, so that's another. You get, not only do you get the pre-emergence control, you also get a fertilizer application. One thing to keep in mind about corn gluten meal, though, the recommended rate for it to be efficient at preventing the germination of weed seeds is, on the bag, it recommends 20 pounds of product per 1,000 square feet. Now that's a lot. And when you apply 20 pounds of product per 1,000 square feet of corn gluten meal, you wind up putting down 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, which is excessive. Which means, if all goes as well, that means you're going to be mowing your grass like every other day. So again, our recommendation is 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. I'm not saying you shouldn't use corn gluten meal. I've used it in the past. I like it. I am not using it for its pre-emergence control. I'm using it because I like the nitrogen that it adds. And it's organic based, which means it feeds my soil. That's why I use it. But there is pre-emergence control. So one thing to keep in mind is if you're going to use corn gluten meal, probably a good idea to avoid doing any type of overseeding at that point in time. So corn gluten meal, for me, is a good spring application, good spring fertilizer feeding. Even though it might not be as effective at pre-emergence control if I don't put that 20 pounds per 1,000 square foot down, because I'm not going to do that, it still may have the potential to kill some of my germinating turfgrass seeds. So again, I'm going to keep those two practices separate. I am overseeding in the late summer, early fall. And why is that weed there in the first place? And it's not necessarily that weed's fault. It's because that area in our yard is just inviting to the weeds, is conducive to its growth. And some of these things are items that we can change easily, like mowing too low, which encourages bluegrass, chickweed, crabgrass, plantains, and speedwell. So when it comes to what do you do about crabgrass prevention, well, first thing you can do is mow higher. Crabgrass is a very prostrate growing plant. If you mow your turf higher, it can shade out that area, that turf crabgrass, and make your lawn more competitive. We're talking about the long-term gain here. Also, compacted soils, another good promoter of crabgrass. So come in with a hollow tine aerator and aerate your lawn. So these practices here, easy to fix. Some of them that are not so easy though, like drought conditions. Unless you irrigate your lawn, you really can't do a rain dance and hopefully the clouds will open up on you. Some of the other things like shade. So when it comes to shade and turf grass, something to keep in mind, as mentioned before, I've got a maple tree in my backyard, and I am pleased as punch that I have violets growing underneath my maple tree because turf grass is not going to. Kentucky bluegrass, tall fescue, these plants, they need a minimum of 4 hours of direct sunlight every day to have a good, healthy stand of grass. You can probably stretch that down to 2 hours of direct sunlight, but you're going to get a very thin, sparse lawn, which is more susceptible to invasion from things like moss and violets and so on and so forth. So when it comes to shade, especially the deep shade, we're talking, for my case, less than 4 hours. But you could stretch that to 2 hours. You should consider growing something else other than turf grass. Now there are the fine fescues. Fine fescues are probably the most shade tolerant of our turf grasses, but they still do require, I would still stand by that 4 hours of direct sunlight a day. You can stretch that to 2 hours, but no less than that. So in a shaded backyard area, if you want turf grass, give fine fescue a try. You'll be fighting an uphill battle, I think, especially if you're talking full shade. Mulch those areas, put in some annual bedding plants or perennials. That would probably be a better option in that case. And as I mentioned, I'm pleased as punch that violets are growing underneath my maple tree. And what makes a weed is the tolerance level of the homeowner, the property manager. The violets don't bother me because I know I'm not going to get grass to grow there. So I'm stand by the adage: if it's green, it's good. It's holding the soil. It's reducing erosion, and it provides a little bit of little habitat for some insects out there. So if you do want to control weeds, herbicides are effective tools for controlling troublesome perennial lawn weeds. So if you're going to turn to herbicides, that's fine. They're effective tools that we have in our tool belts, but spot treat. Don't just broadcast it over the entire lawn. Make sure you read your labels. There are herbicides out there that won't hurt your lawn, but very easily, if you spray them on a hot day, even if there's little wind, they will land on the turf grass, kill the weeds. Great job, but they will volatilize, which is I equate that to something like how water vaporizes. So it lands on the turf grass, but then on a hot day it will volatilize and then it will drift over. And we see this time and time again. It will kill the tomatoes. It will go after the peppers. It will go after the fruit trees and so on and so forth. So make sure that you're reading that label. You are applying those products as the label states. Labels are federal law. Anyway, if you deviate from those labels, you are technically breaking the law. So follow those labels. Not only do they protect the company, they protect you, they protect your plants, and they protect the environment. And so read those labels and follow them to the letter. A good time and to treat perennial weeds, and this is a big question I often get in the spring when it comes to dandelions, because dandelions, they show their stuff in the springtime. That's when they're blooming, they're out, they're very pretty that time of year. But the best time to treat them is actually in the fall, when they're sending all those carbohydrates to the root system. If you want to treat them, send a little bit of herbicide along the way with it. When it comes to insects, this is one slide about insects. Guess what? If you have a healthy, balanced soil and a healthy lawn, you're going to have a lot of insects, and most of them are not pests. Very few actually cause any type of damage in turf. If you do want to turn to something like a grub control or other types of carbarols or imidacloprids that you would apply to your lawns, just know that not only will it affect those pest insects, the very minority pest insects, I'll reinforce, it will also impact the beneficial insects and a lot of the soil biology. So just keep that in mind if you're going to be controlling insects. There are organic-based controls insecticide controls for turf grass. Something that you could probably check this out later. I'm happy to send you these slides later on too if I'm going too fast for you. So really quickly, I want to talk about, we talked about good cultural practice of lawns, but what if we want to do something else? If we want to go beyond the conventional lawn, let's get into that. So lawns are, just covering this, the most economic, aesthetically pleasing ground cover we can have. They're wonderful. They're important in terms of design, and also what would a neighborhood or community be without a beautiful lawn for barbecues and community gatherings? So they're great for social activities. However, we have a lot of them. This aerial photograph of a conventionally developed subdivision here, you can see these houses. They're like, reminds me, they're kind of bobbing in these sea of lawn. And becomes a chore to take care of this massive amount of turf grass. And it's pretty excessive. And really what I say to folks is that the lawn should be suited to the needs of the homeowner. Now this is where I live, here in Macomb, Illinois. We're kind of a rural community, but one of the trends that we're seeing in terms of development is that millennials and baby boomers, we don't want giant lawns to take care of. We want, millennials, we're getting married later in life. We're having kids later in life. And so that means we don't want to have these big postage stamp yards to take care of. And so this is where I live here. So my family, we live in this area, and we have these little backyards that we have to take care of. These residential units are surrounding this common green space, which is great. I don't have to take care of this central green space, but this central green space is a wonderful gathering area for the neighborhood kids. You know, if we're out walking around, having a picnic, you know, meeting your neighbors. And so this is a great social avenue. So you can see here the lawn is tailored more to the needs of this community which has been developed here. So just keep that in mind. You know, just make sure that, you know, if you want a football field of lawn, then you can get that. But this is becoming more of a common development practice, you know, smaller landscapes which are organized around a central green space. So less lawn. So the idea of smaller or no lawns, maybe some people are ready for that, but are we ready for something like this? This is a no-mow lawn. I bet a lot of people are shaking their heads no. Some might be saying yes, this is an aesthetic choice. That's fine. But really what the compromise is here is, as we meet in the middle, is that we have lawns that are shaped by our landscape and the structures and the natural areas. This creates a well-defined lawn, is something that's more aesthetically pleasing. It's just much nicer to have, and we don't have this huge soccer field of turf grass that we have to take care of. It's just this is better. It's more it's just more not necessarily confining, but we feel like we're in enclosed and a safe space. We're not out feeling like we're in the middle of the prairie. So something to run through also again really quick is I wanted to see of all of the different turfgrass species out there, which ones can I put down and have absolutely no inputs and still have them established successfully. So these are the different plots that we put down. This was in Monmouth that we did this. The blue are the cool season grasses. The orange are the warm season grasses that we tried. First one was a no-mow fine fescue mix. As you can see in the middle of this slide here, you know, we really did get pretty good germination of the fine fescue. There's some crabgrass which have invaded here, but when I say no inputs, I seeded this, I prepped the soil, I seeded it, and that's all I did. So we got really good establishment of the fine fescue here. This was the Kentucky bluegrass. It's all crabgrass essentially. It germinated, but it couldn't outcompete the weeds. This here, though, this is tall fescue. We seeded it, did nothing, and you can see how well it established. There's some weed grasses in here, but considering nothing else was done aside from seeding, that's pretty good. So tall fescue did good in this study. Some of the others, the sheep fescue, crabgrass, these are the warm season plots that we put in. The buffalo grass here and blue grama, they germinated, but they could not keep up with the weeds. And so those pretty much were failures. So in this little study here, you know, what turf grass could survive minimal inputs, tall fescue really is the winner, and that fine fescue mix really did come in second place. I did go in, I really wanted to try to get buffalo grass to grow, so I did go in. This was in the middle of July and summer of 2015, and put in some buffalo grass plugs and also some blue grama grass. Got really good germination of the seed that I threw down as well. And so this picture was taken in late July, and by October, this is the straw brown colored grasses on the left. That is the buffalo grass right there. Remember, buffalo grass is a warm season grass, so it browns out in the cooler months of the year, but it really established pretty well in a month and a half, 2 months worth of time. U of I does research. They have some plots out in their turfgrass research facilities in Champaign-Urbana of no-mow lawns. You can see the different various plots that we have out there. This is a rain garden that I installed. This was out in Kansas, where we put in a rain garden here in the center, and then we edged it in buffalo grass. Looks great. This is another image of a no-mow fine fescue. Some things to keep in mind, though, like these no-mow lawns, they're a little wild and woolly. They're not everybody's cup of tea. And so, you know, if you have a strict HOA, or you have a city or municipality that will issue tickets, you might be getting a ticket if you do something like this. And also there's other insects and things that come along with wild, unmowed grass, such as fleas and ticks, and mice and snakes and things like that. But it's all just part of nature. So if fleas are that kind of thing, your thing. So another aerial photograph here. You can see the property here on the right side of the screen. Beautiful lawn. You see the mow lines and the aerial. Look at the building there on the north of it. No turf grass. Down at the street view, we can see that there's no lawn. So this is the idea of lawn free. This homeowner has no need for a lawnmower. They have totally taken out the lawn and replaced it with planting beds. And this was totally in keeping with this development's HOA and the city's rules and regulations. And we have lots of inspiration out there if you want to go the lawn-free route. The nice thing about this is it gives you a chance to incorporate more natural or native plants, which creates habitat for wildlife and things like pollinators and bees. And if you're interested more in the idea of incorporating more plantings, trees and shrubs, perennials, to foster a landscape that's more encompasses the ideas of sustainability, we do have more talks that I've done online on YouTube, sustainable landscaping. Check that out. U of I Extension Horticulture on YouTube, sustainable landscaping. Some of the references here, again, you can come back to the recording and check these out. One thing I will point you to is, though, this one on the bottom, Sustainable Lawn and Landscape Practices for Communities, the Lawn to Lake Guidebook for Illinois and Indiana. This is a really good guidebook for lawn and landscape if you're interested in taking more of a sustainable approach, and it is geared towards our Midwestern climate here, brought to us by the Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant. If you have questions, you want to know more, you wish I had spent more time on a particular slide, just feel free to get in touch with me. I am in the Macomb, Illinois office. You see my number and email here. I'm actually out of the office up until August 1st. My wife and I, we just had our third baby boy, and so I'm just taking some time off, but I will be checking my email. Please feel free to get in touch with me if you do have questions. Don't forget these past recordings of the Four Seasons Gardening Series on YouTube. There are some really good episodes here, webinars, things that I love to spend, just sit down and watch a little bit of. And then time for questions here. Well, I think we've got a couple more in the chat box. Vermilion County's questions of zoysia grass, my opinion. Well, zoysia grass is it's a grass. It's actually a really neat grass. It grows very thick. It creates what looks like to be this bed of turf that I just want to lay down on, but its looks can be deceiving because the leaf blades are actually incredibly stiff. They beat the heck out of your mower blades, and in my neck of the woods you would be hard pressed to find any zoysia grass supplier. And we actually do have one homeowner in Monmouth. She has a zoysia grass lawn, and we've been trying like crazy to find someone in our area to supply her some plugs or something to renovate her 50-year-old zoysia grass lawn. It's been really hard. The other thing I've seen also down in Quincy, Illinois, a family down there, is there are lawn care companies, and you can see the zoysia grass lawns, especially in the springtime, because they're still that straw brown color. And so there's still that straw brown color, and then these lawn care companies, they mow the zoysia grass lawn, and then you can see where they go to a cool season lawn, like a Kentucky bluegrass lawn, and where they unload their mower, I start to see zoysia grass begin to grow and spread. And it's very interesting. Never really would have thought it would spread that easily, but it can, apparently. So in these spots where I see them unload their mowers, over time, we've noticed this little patches of zoysia grass begin to spread in these areas. So very interesting, very telling. Zoysia grass, maybe it'll take over the world. I don't know. Let's see. Our lawn is 60 years old when the house was built. Is there a point when the original grass is too old or the mixture inferior? If so, what's the best way to go about gradually replacing turf over time? Yeah, 60 years old, that's a pretty old turf grass. I typically, I have to, because of children and dogs, have to overseed my lawn probably every year. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. And I'm just overseeding. So I go to the seed store, and I have a tall fescue lawn, and I trying to remember off the top of my head. I think the mix is Millennium and Shenandoah, or Falcon. It's a mix of those three, I believe. Now, since I have been a homeowner, I started with like Falcon version 3, and I think we're on Falcon version 6 now. And so, as I said before, these turfgrass breeders, they are putting out newer varieties all the time that have better resistance to disease, better growth, better uniformity. And so, yes, I would say definitely you want to be overseeding at least once every couple years. And then, try to match the seed to what the grass is. And so I keep my label, my seed label, in my garage on my bench. And so then I can go back to the hardware store, to the seed store, and I make sure that I match those up. Or you can go online and order them, and you have a record of what you ordered. But matching those seed is pretty critical. And one of the neat things is that they are doing a very good job now of matching tall fescue to Kentucky bluegrass. They used to not be the same texture at all, but they're pretty close now, and so we're seeing more mixtures that incorporate both. I would say overseeding is a good way to slowly incorporate a newer variety of turfgrass that's more disease resistant. Do I recommend core aerating each year? It wouldn't hurt. I would say if you've never done it, do it in the spring and fall that first year, and then do it every 2 to 3 years after that. Getting rid of violets. Oh, why would you want to get rid of those things? But one of the key things, getting rid of violets, better sun. You need to, if it's under a tree, you might have to limb up that tree. Better light, airflow, core aerate that area. Herbicides, from what I've heard, is I've never sprayed violets before. It's kind of like you spray a violet with an herbicide and it just runs off like water. They're pretty resilient to herbicides. So basically what you have to do, increase that light, better airflow. If it's in the shade, throw in some fine fescue as that turf grass mix, and then light a candle, say a prayer. But one of the things I've noticed with the violets in my yard is they tend to, the ones in the full sun area, they're gone this time of year. And so, come in and overseed, and I'm fine in terms of that. What kind of kit would you purchase to test soil? What are the parameters? Contact your local extension office. We have a list of soil labs hopefully in your neck of the woods. These are labs that are are licensed and accredited. So we recommend you go through an actual lab. The kits that you would purchase at a home garden center, they might work really nicely for determining pH. But everything else I would be suspect of, especially the kits that say they can tell you the nitrogen levels in your turf or lawn soil. They can't. And so keep that in mind, but contact your local extension office. We have lists of nearby soil labs that you can use. What do I mean by a 3-year rotation for an established lawn? Was that on the aeration? That might have been the aeration. Every 2 to 3 years aerate your lawn. That might have been what I had said. Or 2 to 3 years you should be overseeding your lawn. And a lot of this should be done in the late summer, early fall, when the turf grass is actively growing. The cool season turf grass, I'll add. So your Labor Day weekend is piling up with chores. I'm sorry. Norwegian sunset maple. Can't seem to get anything to grow underneath it. What do you recommend? Mulch. Great. Mulch would be wonderful. Mulch, you can grow that once a year. You just apply more bags and do 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch. Make sure it's never touching the trunk of the tree. In terms of how wide you go with mulch rings around trees, we say as wide as possible. I would say at least 4 feet as a radius around the trunk of the tree. Some of the other things is that my maple tree, because they're such shallow rooted, they are bullies when it comes to water and nutrients in the soil. So that's why my turf won't grow there. So we mulch. I have, of course, violets growing there. We do container plants. I've got a couple hostas in there. And so that's how we deal with we have to accept the fact that underneath trees, especially those shallow rooted trees, turf grass is not going to do well. So I'm not going to fight that battle. I don't know, I'm maybe not strong-willed enough, but I'm going to give in. I'm going to let the violets grow. I'm going to mulch, and I'm going to put some really nice shade annuals in some containers under there. How can I improve grass growing where the roots roots of spruce tree? So spruce, that's an evergreen. When it comes to evergreen trees and turf, they don't mix. That is again one of those places you accept the fact that you have a hopefully beautiful spruce tree that has a lovely skirt which is shading the lawn around it. You can put down either some more mulch. Usually what I find is underneath spruce and pines, they tend to do a pretty good job of keeping the weeds down. Those areas around the spruce tree which are growing turf grass, make sure you're mowing higher, so then you get a good adequate root system on that perimeter, that boundary there. That can be more competitive, I would say, with the spruce tree, but in the world of spruce versus turf, I say spruce wins. A tree will add more value to your property than a lawn. So trees always win when it comes to turf grass in my book. What's the best way to control grubs in your lawn? You can do some type of a grub control application, your standard grub begons and whatnot. So something to keep in mind, those grub controls, as I mentioned before, they will kill the grubs. They will also kill a lot of other things that are in your soil that are not hurting. But if you are having issues with grubs, make sure, again, you're mowing your lawn, your turf grass higher. One way to avoid Japanese beetles finding your turf grass desirable is to not irrigate during the summer months. Japanese beetle females will lay their eggs in low-mown irrigated turf, especially areas that are near pavements that stay warmer. So something to keep in mind if you're having grub control problems. Any type of grub control, I would say, I believe you can, there are people that put it down in the spring, but grubs are pretty big, pretty resilient. Then I would say we're talking about this time of year into mid-August when we're looking at grub control. There is milky spore disease, which is something that goes after Japanese beetles. The studies are pretty variable on that. It does take time for that to build up in the soil, years, in fact, for it to build up in the soil to be effective. And some of the university studies have shown, and if you put down grub control in the meantime, it will kill the bacteria, the milky spore disease bacteria. So it's one of those you kind of got to wait and see. So again, the long-term game. Where do you go buy seed, and what kind of store, what online sites? There's a lot of sites out there. Can't necessarily recommend one over the other. It kind of depends what your goal is and what seed you want. If you want to go for those no-mow mixes, a lot of the native plant nurseries offer those no-mow mixes. They'll be putting in buffalo grass, blue grama grass. They'll be also doing fine fescue mixes. For standard conventional lawn with Kentucky bluegrass, tall fescue, or fine fescue even, there's a lot of places to go. I'm actually not allowed to recommend one company over the other, but something where you get good, viable information from that website, reputable information, where they'll stand behind their products. So for a lot of the research stuff that I do order those online. But for the other items that I do for my own personal use and for some of the volunteer stuff with Master Gardeners, we just go to our local farm store, seed store, and that's where we get our stuff. Farm stores might be plentiful in parts of central Illinois, northern and southern Illinois. I've seen a lot of actual seed stores though closing, so it might be tough to get that knowledge base of someone who knows what they're doing to sell you some seed. So that can be tough. I understand, but you know, some of those old seed stores, and you do have to travel to get to them, or at least give them a call. You might be able to order something from them. Let's see. Another question from Carroll County. Can you purchase core aerators at local stores, or you need to go to a specialty store? So core aerator, what we do is we rent them from a local equipment rental store. So for our research stuff we've done, we've just rented it from our local equipment rental dealer. For residential uses, you just talk to your neighbors and say, hey, I need to aerate my lawn. I bet we all need to. You want to, you know, go in halvesies on this, or, you know, split it 4 or 5 waves with some of your neighbors, and the equipment rental place, they'll deliver the aerator to you. You'll run around everybody's yards and do that, and they'll take it away from you. And since it's something you really only have to do, you know, every 2 to 3 years, it's probably not something you really do want to purchase. But rental has been a really good option for us. So those are the questions that I have read thus far. If anybody has any more questions, we're an hour and a half into this now, so we'll probably go ahead and cut it off here. But please feel free. Let me back up a slide. Check out our recordings. This is my contact information. Always happy to answer any questions you might have. And when it comes to sustainability, don't forget those native plants for pollinators and wildlife and habitat. That's the other part of this talk. It's recorded on YouTube. Go check it out. Thank you all very much.